Hello and welcome to another video guide to The Woman in Black, this time focusing on Chapter 9 in the nursery. Okay guys, make sure you are sitting comfortably because this is a big chapter and this is a big video guide. There's quite a lot in this. I'll try and move through at a slightly swifter pace because I do want to still try and keep the timing reasonably neat. So, Chapter 9 in the nursery. It is reasonable to expect that at some stage we should see in the interior of a nursery, and indeed we do. Paradoxically, whilst this is a large chapter, again, in terms of actual events that happen, not a lot of stuff happens. But that's the point with this novel. It is very low key in terms of action. That's not the point of the ghost story. It's about building tension, and this is a very tense chapter. Arthur actually spends 2 nights. We move into the second night, would probably be a more accurate way of describing it. We move into the second night in this chapter over in Marsh House. He's disturbed by some mysterious noises, discovers some of the backstory, eventually gains entrance to that mysterious locked room. But we'll see as we carry on. So it begins with Arthur waking up. The weather is good. Bit of a broken sleep. Sleep apnea is something that Arthur, we know now, will suffer from for quite some time to come. He gets to know the dog, calls Mr. Bentley on the phone. Again, it's that whole thing of like, oh, he's calling Mr. Bentley on the phone. This was Mr. Bentley who appeared to be firmly embedded in a Dickensian novel. Mr. Bentley, who at one point in time takes Arthur in a pony and trap to the countryside, a time which is some over a decade after this moment. It's just another one of those examples of Susan Hill favoring narrative over historical verisimilitude. And suffice to say, the novel just feels old, and that'll do, because that's all we need. The first day is very ordinary, but Arthur does find this thing which is important to the backstory, a gravestone. He goes for a walk in the graveyard where he has seen the terrible things. He thought that was a really good idea. But this time nothing happens. He does, however, discover some names on the gravestone and surmises that it seems to have been a Drablow family grave some time ago. So the first night is not uneventful. There are events. There is a noise, and Spider reacts to it. Arthur reacts to it, and Arthur and Spider go down the corridor to the impossible door, the locked door, the door that is locked from the inside and cannot be unlocked from the outside. However, they arrive there, the noise stops, but Arthur has moments. There's a moment, I think, of real terror where this noise is coming from somewhere, and Arthur can feel that something is happening. But in this instance, it doesn't. So he goes back to bed, doesn't sleep brilliantly, but does eventually get back to sleep. Following day, he gets up, rides back to the village for supplies, and upon his return, the weather changes again. Here you've got an example of the pathetic fallacy at work. Arthur decides he's going to that's it, no, it's too weird, it's too spooky here. Good time to make this decision. But then he discovers the tides come in and he can't get away anyway. So it's interesting to see how that bike works. So first it gives him that sense of, it turns out I can get to and from this place without any difficulty at all. It'll all be oh no, it's not. It's not fine at all. It's not fine. So again, you can see the bike acting as a plot device. It gives off that false sense of security, draws him in. However, towards evening, he keeps working through, discovers a set of documents that fill in even more of the story of the Woman in Black. Although we don't know it yet, we learn about the adoption of the son of one Jeanette Humphrey by her sister Alice Drablow, and we see this dialogue between these two characters, and Jeanette Humphrey's clearly incredibly emotional, being forced into giving up her child. And we're also introduced to one of the kind of themes of the story, which is the treatment of women and the treatment of single mothers in particular, and looking at how that's historically been a a mark of shame upon our society, the way that women have been treated in those circumstances, and in many other circumstances too. But specifically here, we're looking at the treatment of single mothers and the treatment of the children of single mothers. And then the strange noises happen again. We hear the bumping from upstairs. Ooh, is there a connection between the letters and the bump? Yeah, there is. And Arthur goes to an outhouse to get a hatchet to break down the door. Probably one of the simultaneously most sensible and least sensible things Arthur can do. Right, I'm determined to find what's making the noise in the haunted house. Right, okay. But I'm going to arm myself with an axe. Okay, makes sense. Arm yourself. But if it's a ghost, it's probably no more frightened of an axe than it is of a bike or a dog. So, but once outside, he goes outside. He's brought a torch with him, though that at least is a positive note. He's brought a torch with him, goes outside, finds the axe, and then he can hear the pony and trap. So he runs around to the front of the house because, of course, that's a real pony and trap. And then it turns out it's not a real pony and trap. In fact, it's that ghostly sound that he's heard at the previous times. And this makes Arthur frantic, and it also makes Spider frantic. Subsequently, though, they retreat into the house with a now very distressed dog. Arthur has to carry the dog in, actually. But once in, the dog pelts off upstairs, runs straight to that impossibly locked room. However, it isn't locked anymore, nor is it closed. And we get a fantastic line, one of the most chilling lines in the entire book, delivered. Arthur, of course, having been terrified, standing absolutely terrified, staring at this door, decides the best thing to do is to go inside. Yeah, of course. Not that he has any choice at this stage anymore. He's already locked into these behaviors. And he enters to find a nursery, surprise, surprise, but a room that is completely frozen in time. It's preserved in a way that the rest of the house isn't, and Hill is at pains to describe this. She doesn't come out and say it as such, but she describes a room that doesn't feel damp, that feels like it could almost have just been tidied away and used the previous day. Arthur examines the items and he says they have that kind of feeling of newness, but of being cared for and have been used and looked after. Only odd thing, Arthur comes into the room and feels a kind of an overwhelming sort of sense of sadness, just a melancholy. It's not as terrible as the emotions that inhabit him later, but more on this in the following chapter. He leaves, returns to his bedroom, tries to go back to sleep, and the chapter finishes around then. So, things to note. We have got, again, another example of the overall narrative structure, but this time we're now back on the uptick of the tension. And what we do see is a series of little sawtooths within the bigger structure of the narrative. We see a series of peaks and troughs. There's the tension of the first night, and then nothing, and then actually it all looks like it's getting better, and then it steadily declines and it gets worse, and then on the other side of the door is an empty nursery, an impossible room, but Arthur isn't really considering the kind of the physics of that at this point. A room that seems literally preserved in time. And then it all just seems to fall away again. Obviously, not completely. Arthur's still in a haunted house, which has clearly got something very odd going on. Again, the pathetic fallacy. Food, environment, it all manipulates Arthur's state. At one point in time on the first day there, he eats a perfectly adequate meal. And again, we're comforted by the fact that he's able to get sustenance, to do the things that normal people do, to rest, to eat. He even has a bath at one point. He's able to cycle to and from the house. Things seem ordinary-ish, or at least as ordinary as they have seemed at Eelmarsh House. And again, then the weather changes. Then we get something else. Then the mist comes back, occluding Arthur's sight, trapping him, keeping him where he is. So, sound imagery. Sound imagery is key. We've talked about this before. It is one of the key drivers of tension in the novel, and here we hear the replay of those same sounds with the addition of that sound, which we later in the chapter learn to be the rocking chair. thumping. This noise, which Arthur, when he first hears it, describes as something that should have comforted him, but in the context that it was, didn't. And then later on, as he comes to the door the second time, it's again that noise that makes him think, actually, this could be a place where I should feel safe. This is a noise I recognize, and in another context, it should make me feel comfortable. And it's kind of that draws him in. Again, that sound, though, initially, that bump, 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 bump that is being described, could sound like a heartbeat of some giant creature, or we don't know what, but this noise with nothing to put it to, the reader's imagination is going as wild as Arthur's is. And of course, then we get the terrifying and emotionally poignant, drowning noises, that powerfully emotive sound, that clearly that repetition of a tragic accident from times past that we start to hear. And what we do see is a real use of the sentence structure, the listing, long multi-clausal sentences to describe everything from the atmosphere to the emotion, Arthur's emotional state, lots of layering of verbs and adjectives, extensive listing, and then into a short focused sentence at the end. Dickens, an exponent of this, clearly. This is a stylistic device that the two writers share, and it's one that is deployed frequently throughout the novel, particularly in moments of high tension. So let's just have a quick look at some key quotations then. So the sun was high, here we go. This line is brilliant. It's all lovely. Seabirds are swooping. Eel Marsh House beckoned to me. What? The house actually summons Arthur, goes, come on, come in, the water's lovely. How much of a clearer signal does Arthur actually need? As I say in the words of Admiral Akbar, it's a trap. Run away. Just get away. The house is beckoning to you, for pity's sakes. Arthur is clearly subconsciously aware that this is a remarkably bad idea and that the house is actually almost actively engaged in haunting him. But also it's another example of the sublime. He's got those extreme emotions, that incredible reaction to the environment, to the house. This is quite interesting. We have this thing where he says, everything was ordinary, I'd forgotten everything else. So it's just nice that we've got this example of Arthur kind of reflecting and attempting to kind of clarify for us, the reader, that this is not just the ramblings of a madman, that this is, he was in a perfectly calm, reasonable state of mind when the terrible things, the mysterious things that follow, happened. And then you've got this use of Spider here. Spider functioning as a plot device. Spider also functioning as a kind of an extra set of senses for Arthur. Arthur is being told by the dog's reaction something is occurring. Arthur is able to sense and see more because of the presence of the dog. The dog reacts, and when the dog's mood and reactions alter, Arthur can change. And again, when he goes into the room at the end of the chapter and the dog has calmed down, we know that obviously things have fallen away. There's nothing to be frightened. If the dog isn't frightened, Arthur probably doesn't need to be frightened. I mean, he should be permanently frightened given where he is, but there's no immediate threat. She does have another symbolic function, another plot device function to come, but we'll talk about that in the next chapter. So again, the structural devices. Here we've got that long multi-clausal sentence, the nose went on and the dog continued to stand, bristling at the door, now putting a nose to the door. So we've got all these verb phrases coming along. And then we've got this listening, and every so often. So she starts, and Susan Hill does like to do this, she starts sentences with a conjunction. She's far more concerned about the rhythm of the sentences than she is the grammar. She manipulates the grammatical structures here to provide emphasis on the lexical elements and the narrative elements she wants us to focus on. And again, this is a really nice way of very precisely controlling that dramatic tension. Another textual and structural device here, sound imagery, the silence, but also then using sound imagery combined with a visual image, a seething, blanketing, almost tangible silence. It's thick as felt. So we've got this tactile image, I suppose, as well. We know how felt would feel, this soft, thick heaviness, but then we can see it. It's like a blanket. She does obviously talk about a musty darkness as well. So we're mixing up the visual and the tactile, and a seething, blanketing silence. So again, blanketing being a tactile, almost tangible, touchable. So you can almost see and feel the silence, and you can definitely see or not see the darkness. See the darkness, I suppose, but also feel it. So again, that metaphor, that blanketing, that verb there, as that simile for the darkness, is really useful. Again, that idea of something being drawn over Arthur's eyes and stealing from him his sight. And then there we have that use of the pathetic fallacy. The first thing I noticed on the following morning was a change in the weather. So back to, again, those handful of techniques that Hill uses. They are, you can literally list what she does. The ways she employs them, the combinations she employs them in are varied, but she uses a handful of things and does them very, very well and crafts this atmosphere very effectively. And the pathetic fallacy is back, and this time, of course, it's signaling that things are going to be different, and indeed they are. Here it is. Nope, here comes the math. Here comes the mist. We're cut off. Here we are, we're trapped, as we said. See, it's a different sort of day again. And of course, we see Arthur as the rational protagonist. We've seen him as the rational protagonist before, and we know it could be leading him to danger, but by now, that's it. It's too late. Arthur is trapped. We do think that he probably should think it's a good idea. Would it be more? Would they pursue him more closely if he ran away now? No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't dog his heels, or maybe they would. Maybe it wouldn't make any difference. He's there now. But again, this idea of Arthur is still trying to justify, almost presumably to himself, why he chose the actions that he did. We all do that. We all do that. We all have that sense of, well, I did it because I didn't have any other choice. Well, you are comforting yourself about a choice poorly made by suggesting there were no other choices. Here, Arthur's going, well, I couldn't have done anything else. If I didn't, great, it would be their power to disturb me. Probably not. So, here we've got this recognition of the rule of the haunting. This is later on in the chapter. He's hearing the noise again, and he realizes that, no, this isn't happening now. It wasn't happening the last time I heard it. But here is a repetition of an event that must have happened. And it's his realization that this had happened, whether it was happening now or whether it happened in the past. The fact that it had happened at all is the thing that really disturbs Arthur, and it provokes that emotional response. And the fact that it's being played out over and over again, and it's beyond his capacity to do anything about it. Here we go. The door of the room from which the noise came, the door which had been securely locked, so that I had not been able to break it down, the door to which there could not be a key, that door was now standing open, wide open. That long multi-clausal sentence, that anaphora, the repetition of door over and over again, that door which is a thing that is between Arthur and the truth, between Arthur and the ghost, between Arthur and whatever, is now open. This door to another world, and it is literally another world, and it's a place and time that is separate from where Arthur is. Frankly, that is one of the most terrifying sentences that I can read, and when I read that with classes, I always try to leave the lesson just on that point, and it's the tension of that long sentence combined with that repetition down to that wide open, and the unknown being on the other side of it is frankly terrifying. And then here we have it, the idea of the thing that is actually in the room, aside from this child's bedroom is the emotional atmosphere, the air of sadness of something being lost and missing. And we can begin to put together things for ourselves. We begin to weave the story together for ourselves from the sounds of a child out on the marsh in their final moments to the grave, to the letters. We begin to put the story together for ourselves. Interestingly enough, this kind of stops Arthur from reacting in the kind of rational and logical fashion that we would expect. He doesn't, however, question some of the things, like why does it feel different? Why isn't it damp like the rest of the house? If this hasn't been lived in, how could it have opened and he'd not have seen whoever was behind the door come out or found them in the room, because the room wasn't big enough for them to hide in? And then you've also got the question of that candle holder, that dish of water that would catch the hot falling wax, still has water in it when it should have evaporated long ago. So there you have it. One of the most powerful chapters in the book, and in my opinion, probably one of the most powerful lines in the book, and it's just that 2-word there. So there you go. Chapter 9. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.